The sharp, definitive click of the emergency lock echoed through the cavernous lobby of the Vance Tower, a sound as cold and final as a gavel strike. It sliced through the low hum of residual chatter from the charity gala upstairs, instantly drawing every eye to the grand revolving doors. There, standing like a forgotten statue carved from granite and time, was Arthur Jenkins. At 72, his navy blue security uniform seemed to hang on a frame made of quiet resilience, the fabric a stark, humble contrast to the polished marble floors and the soaring, crystal-dusted ceilings. For a heartbeat, the cavernous space was held in a bubble of confused silence. Then the bubble burst. "Excuse me, sir!" A voice thin with exhaustion pierced the quiet. Maria Rodriguez, her worn coat pulled tight against the late autumn chill that seeped through the glass, took a hesitant step forward. Her 5-year-old daughter, Sophia, was a sleeping weight against her leg, a small, trusting bundle of innocence in a world of stark angles and cold surfaces. "We need to leave. My daughter is tired. It's late." Maria's plea was not demanding, but desperate. The frayed edge of a mother who had worked a grueling cleaning shift and wanted nothing more than the sanctuary of their small apartment in Queens. Her words opened the floodgates. A portly gentleman, his face already flushed from an evening of champagne and self-importance, strode towards the doors, his bespoke tuxedo straining at the seams. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Do you realize who I am? Open this door immediately, you old fool." Art Jenkins didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on some unseen point beyond the glass, his jaw set, the deep lines around his eyes betraying nothing. He simply offered a slow, deliberate shake of his head. The silent refusal was more infuriating to the gathered elite than any shouted argument could have been. A woman draped in a constellation of diamonds, her face a carefully constructed mask of disdain, let out an incredulous scoff. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she hissed to her companion, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when you let these old folks hang around past their prime. He probably just forgot how to operate the lock." If your heart is pounding for Maria and Sophia right now, caught between this cruel arrogance and a silent, unexplainable command, show some support and hit that like button. The woman's words were like salt in an open wound for Maria. She pulled Sophia closer, the little girl stirring and whimpering at the escalating tension. From a few yards away, a presence of immense and quiet power detached itself from the shadows near a marble column. Eleanor Vance, the empress of this corporate kingdom, lowered her phone, the final words of a multi-million-dollar acquisition still hanging in the air around her like an expensive perfume. Her piercing blue eyes, accustomed to dissecting stock charts and hostile takeovers, swept over the commotion with a flicker of pure irritation. This was inefficiency. This was a disruption. This was unacceptable. Her security chief, a burly man named Dave, whose loyalty was measured in his eagerness to please, was already moving towards the scene. "What in the world is going on, Dave?" Eleanor's voice was low, but it cut through the growing clamor like a surgeon's scalpel. "Why is that man delaying our guests? He looks like he's lost his marbles." "I'm on it, Ms. Vance," Dave promised, his face a mask of dutiful concern. He leaned in conspiratorially. "He's been acting a bit strange lately, ma'am. Overly cautious. I'll replace him tomorrow. First thing." Eleanor gave a curt, dismissive nod. The old guard was a relic, a cog in the machine that was clearly beginning to rust. He was a problem to be solved, a line item to be removed. Her gaze fell for a fraction of a second on Maria and Sophia. She saw their worn clothes, their tired faces, a stark, uncomfortable stain on the otherwise pristine canvas of her lobby. She quickly averted her eyes, a strange and unwelcome discomfort prickling beneath her skin. They were invisible, or at least they were supposed to be. The tuxedoed gentleman was now inches from Art's face, his own turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I will have your job for this. I will have you thrown out on the street, you hear me? You will be begging for scraps by morning." Art's expression didn't change, but his eyes for the first time flickered. They swept the empty street outside, then moved almost imperceptibly upwards, scanning the facades of the buildings across the wide avenue before returning to the middle distance. He remained a silent, unyielding sentinel, Maria, on the verge of tears, tried one last time. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Sir, my name is Maria. This is my daughter, Sophia. She's only 5. She has a little cough and she needs her bed. We live so far away. Please, whatever is going on, can't you just let us pass?" The direct, human plea seemed to momentarily find a crack in Art's armor. His gaze softened for a nanosecond as it met hers, a flicker of something ancient and weary in their depths, but the lock remained engaged. The door remained sealed. Eleanor Vance watched, her impatience hardening into a cold decision. Dave was right. The man would be gone by morning. She adjusted the heavy diamond clasp at her neck, her chauffeured car now idling by the curb, a sleek black phantom visible just beyond the glass. It was a symbol of her world, powerful, efficient, and waiting for her command. All that stood between her, and it was this stubborn, silent old man, and the chaotic little scene he had created. Her mind, already moving on to the next day's business, the next corporate conquest, barely registered the quiet dignity in his posture, the focused intensity of his gaze. To her and to everyone else trapped in the glittering cage of the Vance Tower lobby, Arthur Jenkins was just an obstacle, a glitch in the system, a foolish old man who had dared to stand in the way of the powerful. The question on everyone's lips, spoken or screamed in their minds, was the same. How could he possibly be so insolent? What could possibly be going through his head to justify this madness? Art stood his ground, the weight of their judgment washing over him unnoticed. His hand, hidden from their view, rested lightly on the cool metal of his security console. His eyes, clear and sharp, scanned the darkness outside one final time, and his jaw set like stone. He saw what they didn't. He knew what they couldn't. And he was not going to move. The biting cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin soles of Maria Rodriguez's worn shoes, a stark contrast to the fierce, protective warmth that flooded her as she held Sophia's small hand. In the vast cathedral-like lobby of the Vance Tower, they were an island of faded denim and quiet desperation in a sea of bespoke suits and shimmering silk. Maria's world had shrunk to this single terrifying point, the unyielding glass doors, the silent, immovable old man guarding them, and the rising tide of wealthy impatience that threatened to drown her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of exhaustion and fear. Every tick of the ornate clock on the wall was a second stolen from Sophia's sleep, another moment trapped in this gilded cage. To understand Maria's bone-deep weariness, one would have to follow her ghost-like through the preceding hours. Long after the last executive had departed, leaving behind the lingering scent of ambition and expensive cologne, Maria's shift began. She moved through the darkened, silent floors of the Vance Tower, not as a person, but as an eraser of the day's activities. Her cart, with its rattling bottles of chemicals and soft cloths, was her constant companion. In a small, vacant office on the 23rd floor, a space awaiting a new tenant, she would create a small sanctuary for her daughter. 2 of her own jackets, laid carefully over a plush visitor's chair, became a makeshift bed. Sophia, curled into a small ball with her well-loved teddy bear, would fall asleep to the distant hum of the building's life support and the rhythmic swish of her mother's mop against the floor. Maria worked with a quiet, desperate efficiency, her movements fueled by the image of her daughter's sleeping face. This was her life, a relentless cycle of scrubbing away the footprints of the powerful so she could afford the tiny apartment in Queens where Sophia could, for a few hours, dream of being a princess. The struggle was etched into the lines around her eyes and the permanent ache in her lower back, a private battle fought in the lonely hours between midnight and dawn. Back in the lobby, that private battle had become a grotesquely public spectacle. The portly man in the tuxedo, whose name Maria would later learn was Mr. Harrington, a board member of some faceless corporation, had moved from blustering to outright verbal assault. "I'm telling you for the last time, old man," he snarled, jabbing a thick finger in Arthur Jenkins' direction. "You are a public servant in a private building. You serve us. Open this door, or I will personally see to it that you spend your remaining pathetic years on the street." A woman beside him, dripping in so many diamonds she seemed to cast her own light, chimed in with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Honestly, Harold, don't waste your breath. He's probably deaf or senile. They should have mandatory retirement ages for these positions. It's a liability. Each word was a physical blow to Maria. They weren't just insulting Arthur. They were insulting everyone like him, everyone like her. The invisible, the disposable, the people who kept their world running smoothly while they dined and danced. If your heart is also aching for the dignity of people like Maria and Arthur, leave a like to show that their strength is seen. But through it all, Arthur Jenkins stood as if carved from granite. He did not flinch. He did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on something beyond the glass, his posture betraying a discipline that was utterly alien to this environment. His stillness was not the stillness of confusion or age. It was the coiled stillness of a predator, of a soldier in a watchtower. The faint lines on his weathered face were not just from age, but from years of focused observation, of watching horizons for threats most people never knew existed. The sterile, predictable environment of the Vance Tower was a far cry from the dusty, sun-baked landscapes of his youth, but the principles remained the same. You watch, you wait, and you never, ever break your watch until the threat has passed. Across the lobby, Eleanor Vance observed the scene with a cold, analytical fury. This was an unacceptable breach of protocol, a disruption. In her world, problems were identified and eliminated with ruthless efficiency. Arthur Jenkins was no longer a person. He was a malfunctioning gear in her perfectly calibrated machine. She motioned to Dave, her head of security. "Handle it," she commanded, her voice low and sharp. "I want him removed from the premises tonight, and I want a full report on how this was allowed to happen on my desk by 7 a.m. Dave, a burly man whose authority came from his tailored suit and earpiece rather than any innate command, strode forward. "Art," he said, his voice a forced attempt at calm authority. "Stand down, that's a direct order. Unlock the doors." Arthur didn't even turn his head. He gave a barely perceptible shake, a silent, absolute refusal. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The insubordination was baffling, infuriating. Her gaze swept past the old guard and fell, for a second time, on the cleaning woman and her child. Maria was now kneeling, murmuring softly to Sophia, shielding her daughter's body with her own, as if to protect her from the venomous words filling the air. For a fleeting, uncomfortable moment, Eleanor felt a pang of something unfamiliar. It wasn't pity. It was a disquieting sense of recognition. In the woman's fierce, protective posture, Eleanor saw a distorted reflection of her own relentless drive to protect her empire. The emotion was the same, only the scale was different. The thought was so alien, so unwelcome, that she pushed it away instantly. Annoyed at her own momentary lapse in focus, the standoff intensified. Dave placed a heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Art, I'm not asking you again." It was then that it happened. As Maria looked up from her daughter, her eyes, wide with fear and a mother's desperate plea, met Arthur's. For the first time, the old guard's focus broke from the street outside. He turned his head slightly and looked directly at her. It was a look that lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it was a lifetime of communication. He wasn't looking at a hysterical cleaning woman. He saw the truth of her, the same way he saw the truth of the unseen threat outside. He saw a guardian. He saw a fellow soldier holding a defensive line. In her eyes, he didn't see a request to escape. He saw a silent, profound understanding of protection. And what she saw in his was not the blank stubbornness of a confused old man, but a deep, sorrowful resolve. He was protecting them, all of them, from something they couldn't see. A shared, unseen burden passed between them in that silent glance, and the knowledge settled in Maria's heart with the weight of cold lead. He was not the cause of their confinement. He was the reason for their safety. The moment broke. Arthur turned his gaze back toward the street, his posture even more rigid than before. But the brief exchange had unsettled him. The woman's gaze had pierced through decades of tactical conditioning, reminding him of exactly who and what he was standing guard for. It wasn't the building. It wasn't the paycheck. It was for the sleeping child who deserved to wake up in her own bed tomorrow. Frustrated beyond measure, Dave reached for his radio to call for backup to physically remove his own man. The tuxedoed gentleman was now on his phone, loudly threatening lawsuits. But as the chaos reached its peak, Arthur's body tensed in a new way. His eyes, expertly scanning the upper floors of the buildings across the avenue, had locked onto something. A flicker of movement where there should be none. A subtle distortion in the reflection of a darkened window. It was a detail 99.9% of people would have missed, a tiny anomaly in the city's vast visual noise. But to Arthur Jenkins, it was as loud as a gunshot. The threat was no longer potential. It was imminent. And he knew with chilling certainty that opening those doors now would not be an act of compliance, but an act of mass execution. The heavy silence that followed the definitive click of the lock had curdled into a thick, suffocating tension. What had begun as a moment of inconvenient delay, a frustrating bottleneck at the end of a long evening, was now stretching into its 10th minute, then its 15th. The air in the Vance Tower lobby, usually circulating with the crisp, clean scent of corporate success, now felt stale, heavy with the unperfumed anxieties of the people trapped within it. Maria Rodriguez shifted her weight, the sleeping form of her 5-year-old daughter, Sophia, becoming a leaden ache in her arms. Every muscle in Maria's back screamed in protest, a dull fire that had been smoldering through the final hours of her cleaning shift and was now threatening to rage. She could feel Sophia's small, rhythmic breaths against her neck, a fragile counterpoint to the ugly crescendo of impatience building around them. "This is utterly preposterous," boomed the portly gentleman in the tuxedo, a man Maria now knew as Mr. Harrington, a board member of some faceless conglomerate. He jabbed a sausage-like finger in Arthur Jenkins's direction. "I have a flight to Zurich in 3 hours. I will not be held hostage by a senile watchman. Dave, for God's sake, do something." Dave, the head of security, was sweating visibly under the high-wattage lobby lights. He had tried reasoning with Art, then ordering him, but the old man remained as immovable as the granite pillars that held up the ceiling. "I'm trying, sir," Dave said, his voice strained. "Mr. Jenkins isn't responding." "Then remove him," shrieked a woman draped in a constellation of diamonds, her voice thin and sharp as shattered glass. "Physically remove him. Surely you have procedures for malfunctioning employees." Her gaze swept over Maria and Sophia with undisguised contempt, as if they were part of the same mechanical failure, a stain on the otherwise pristine lobby. Maria flinched, pulling Sophia closer. She wanted to be invisible, to shrink into the polished marble floor, but the woman's words found their mark. Malfunctioning employee. It was how they all saw her too, the woman who came in after dark to scrub their toilets and empty their trash, a ghost in the machine of their wealth. Her desperation was no longer just about getting Sophia home to her bed. It was a desperate primal need to escape this place of casual cruelty. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, directing her plea to Art's unyielding back. "My little girl, she's just a little girl." Sophia stirred at the sound of her mother's voice, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Mommy," she whimpered, her voice thick with sleep. "I want to go home, I'm thirsty." The simple, childish request was like a key turning in a lock deep inside Maria. It broke through her exhaustion and fear, igniting a spark of maternal fire. "Did you hear that?" she said, her voice suddenly louder, clearer, trembling with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She took a step towards Arthur Jenkins. "She needs to go home, whatever this is, whatever game you are playing, it has to stop now." For the first time, Art's posture changed, but only infinitesimally. A slight shift in his shoulders, a subtle tightening of the muscles along his jaw. His eyes, however, never left the street. He didn't acknowledge Maria's plea, but the absolute stillness of his focus seemed to deepen, as if her voice had only reinforced his resolve. Across the lobby, standing near the silent, gleaming reception desk, Eleanor Vance observed the entire tableau with a growing sense of profound unease. Her initial irritation had morphed into a cold, analytical curiosity. This wasn't a simple case of an elderly employee having a senior moment. There was a pattern here, a logic to the old man's madness that she couldn't yet decipher, and it bothered her. Eleanor Vance did not like unsolved puzzles, especially in her own building. She watched Arthur Jenkins. His 72-year-old frame was straight, his stance balanced like a career soldier, not a man who spent 12-hour shifts on his feet. His hands, clasped behind his back, were steady. There was no tremor, no sign of confusion. His gaze, sweeping the dark expanse of the street and the buildings opposite, was not vacant. It was methodical. He wasn't lost in a fog of dementia. He was watching, he was waiting. The realization sent a faint, icy chill down her spine. Her eyes flickered from Art to the security chief, Dave, who was now babbling into his radio, his authority crumbling with each passing second. He was a man of procedures, of checklists. Faced with a situation that was not in the manual, he was useless. Then her gaze landed on Maria Rodriguez and her daughter. She saw the raw desperation etched on the mother's face, the worn fabric of her coat, the deep protective curve of her body as she shielded her child from the hostile environment. Eleanor felt a familiar pang of discomfort, the same one she felt when a charity appeal showed images of starving children. It was an inconvenience, an unwelcome emotional data point in a world she had meticulously curated to be efficient and predictable. She usually dismissed it with a tax-deductible donation and moved on. But she couldn't look away now. The child, Sophia, was rubbing her eyes, her small face a mask of tired confusion. The raw, unfiltered reality of their struggle, happening right here on her polished marble floor, was a stark and jarring contrast to the abstract millions she had just secured on her phone call. "He's a stubborn old fool, Eleanor," Mr. Harrington brayed, striding over to her. "We should call the police, have him arrested for unlawful imprisonment." Eleanor barely heard him. Her mind was working, connecting disparate dots. The time of night. The gala had been a magnet for some of the city's most powerful figures. The relative silence of the street outside, with most of the cars and crowds having already dispersed, and Arthur Jenkins's almost imperceptible movements. She saw it now. His hand, resting on his hip, was not just resting. His thumb was hovering, fair fraction of an inch from the discreet emergency beacon built into the side of his badge. His upward glances weren't random. He was checking the rooftops, the high windows of the buildings across the avenue. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from a security briefing she had attended years ago. A mandatory but tedious presentation on executive protection. The consultant, a grim-faced ex-Secret Service agent, had spoken about threat assessment, about establishing perimeters, about how the most dangerous threats often came not from the front, but from a distance. The first visible crack appeared in her hardened composure. The neat, orderly columns of her worldview, where people were assets or liabilities, where problems were solved with money or force, began to tremble. Her initial assessment of Art as an inefficient, obsolete relic was wrong. It was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. This man wasn't malfunctioning. He was functioning on a level none of them could comprehend. She felt a sudden urgent need to see what he was seeing. Dismissing Harrington with an impatient wave of her hand, Eleanor Vance walked slowly, deliberately, towards the vast glass wall of the entrance, her designer heels clicking softly on the marble. The angry murmurs of the guests faded into a background hum. Her world narrowed to the old man in the navy blue uniform and the dark city beyond the glass. She stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to see the reflection of her own face, pale, questioning, superimposed over the glittering skyline. She was no longer just waiting for her car. She was searching for an answer, a terrible answer she was starting to suspect she did not want to find. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, the silence stretching into a fragile, terrifying membrane, ready to be punctured by the truth. The air in the Vance Tower lobby had grown thin and sharp, stretched to its breaking point. The portly gentleman in the bespoke tuxedo, his face a blotchy canvas of crimson indignation, took a threatening step toward Arthur Jenkins. "I have had enough of this," he snarled, his voice a low growl meant to intimidate. "You will open this door now, or I will personally see to it that you spend your remaining pathetic years on the street." Beside him, the woman draped in diamonds let out a theatrical sigh. Honestly, the incompetence, it's simply baffling. Maria Rodriguez felt a fresh wave of despair wash over her. Sophia had started to stir in her arms, her small body trembling with a fatigue that was rapidly turning into fretful tears. Every instinct in Maria's body screamed to get her daughter home, to the safety of their small warm bed. She looked at Art, her eyes pleading, But the old man's face remained a mask of granite, his gaze fixed on something far beyond them, something none of them could see. Eleanor Vance watched the scene unfold from a calculated distance, her annoyance solidifying into a cold resolve. This was an unacceptable breach of decorum and efficiency. Dave, her head of security, was already on his radio, his face a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. Eleanor tapped her foot impatiently, the sound a sharp, rhythmic counterpoint to the rising chaos. Her chauffeured car was waiting just beyond the glass, a sleek black oasis in the chilly Manhattan night. She adjusted the heavy diamond clasp at her throat, a familiar grounding gesture she performed before closing a deal or firing an underperforming executive. Her eyes, sharp and accustomed to spotting the smallest inconsistencies on a balance sheet, drifted to the vast, polished glass wall of the lobby. It was less a window and more a mirror, reflecting the opulent interior back at itself, a perfect, shimmering image of her kingdom. And that is when she saw it, not in the world outside, but in the reflection of the world within. At first it was nothing, a flicker so small her mind almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, a stray reflection from a passing car. But it wasn't moving like a car's headlight. It was a tiny, impossibly bright pinprick of red light, dancing with unnatural precision on the ornate carved cornice of the building, directly across the street. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for identifying threats, kicked into a gear it hadn't used since her days analyzing corporate espionage tactics. The red dot was too steady, too deliberate. As she stared, frozen, the dot began to move. It slid down the stone facade with a terrifyingly smooth purpose, leaving the opposite building and beginning its silent, predatory journey across the expanse of the street, straight toward the Vance Tower. It paused for a fraction of a second, resting on one of the darkened windows several floors above the lobby. A sudden, visceral cold, colder than the November wind outside, shot through Eleanor's veins. It was a dread so profound it dwarfed the fear of any hostile takeover or market crash. The laser, the locked doors, the old guard's inexplicable, silent, unyielding refusal to budge. The pieces of the puzzle, which had seemed like a random collection of irritations just moments before, now slammed together in her mind with the force of a physical blow, forming a single horrifying picture. Art! The name tore from her lips, not with her usual clipped authority, but with a raw, ragged urgency that was utterly alien to her. The sound cracked through the tension, silencing the entire lobby. Every head swiveled in her direction. The tuxedoed man froze mid-bluster. Maria looked up, her own fear momentarily forgotten, in the shock of hearing the building's empress cry out in what sounded like sheer panic. "The laser!" Eleanor's voice was trembling now, a thing she thought impossible. She raised a shaking hand, her perfectly manicured finger pointing not at Art, but at the reflection in the glass. The red laser. The crowd turned, their faces a sea of confusion, trying to follow her gaze. But Art did not need to look. For the first time all evening he turned his head slowly, his ancient, weary eyes meeting Eleanor Vance's. In that single, shared glance, a lifetime of unspoken understanding passed between the billionaire and the security guard. It was a look of grim, shared knowledge, a terrifying recognition of a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, the stoic mask on his face finally replaced by a grim, chilling certainty. "Sniper," Art said. His voice was low and gravelly, yet it carried across the suddenly silent marble floor with the weight of a death sentence. He finally looked away from Eleanor, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of the people he had been protecting. Been tracking it for a few minutes, saw it when the cleaning crew started to leave. He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. Didn't want anyone in the kill zone. A collective shuddering gasp swept through the lobby. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The tuxedoed man's face drained of all color, going from crimson to a pasty, sickly white in an instant. The woman beside him let out a small, strangled whimper, her hand flying to the diamonds at her throat as if to ward off an unseen evil. Dave, the head of security, stood utterly paralyzed, his face a mask of dawning horror and professional shame. He had been about to fire the one man who understood the real threat. Maria Rodriguez pulled Sofia so tightly against her chest that the little girl cried out, her earlier frustration replaced by an icy, paralyzing fear for her child's life. The glass doors were no longer a prison, they were a shield. For Eleanor Vance, the moment was a cataclysm. A wave of profound, burning shame washed over her, so intense it made her feel dizzy. She had stood there in her cocoon of wealth and power, judging him, dismissing him, a relic, an old fool. In her mind, she had ridiculed this man, this quiet, dignified sentinel who was at that very moment standing between all of them, between her and a violent, anonymous death. Her gaze fell on Maria and Sofia, huddled together, the very picture of vulnerability. She had averted her eyes from them earlier, annoyed by their presence, by the untidy intrusion of their poverty into her pristine world. Now, she saw them through Art's eyes, the innocent lives he was determined to protect. The realization shattered her. It wasn't just a sniper's bullet he had stopped, it was the bullet of her own callous indifference, her own blindness. As if on cue, the distant wail of police sirens began to cut through the night, growing steadily louder, a welcome shriek in the suffocating silence. The building's advanced security systems, triggered by a hidden button, Art had pressed beneath his badge minutes before anyone had noticed a thing. Now fully engaged, steel shutters began to descend over the massive glass walls, with a series of heavy, reassuring thuds, encasing them all in a protective cocoon. In the midst of the rising panic, Arthur Jenkins was transformed. He was no longer a stooped, invisible old man. He stood taller, his shoulders squared, an air of quiet command radiating from him. "Dave, get on the horn to the NYPD," he ordered. His voice crisp and clear, with an authority that Dave, despite being his superior, did not question. "Tell them we have a confirmed sniper, east-facing building, likely upper floors. Tell them the target is likely high value, possibly Ms. Vance. All other personnel, move everyone away from the exterior walls, back of the lobby now." His words, precise and calm, cut through the fear. People scrambled to obey. He was no longer Art, the security guard. He was a commander, revealing a history in military intelligence that his simple blue uniform had so effectively concealed for years. He moved with a veteran's economy of motion, directing, reassuring, controlling the chaos with a practiced ease that left everyone, especially Eleanor, in complete awe. Within minutes, the street outside was a flashing sea of red and blue lights. SWAT teams swarmed the area, their movements swift and professional. The immediate threat, as it turned out, was neutralized quickly. The would-be assailant, a disgruntled former investor, was apprehended before a single shot was fired. But inside the sealed lobby of the Vance Tower, the true impact of the night was just beginning to resonate. The danger was over, but for everyone who had been trapped behind that glass, the world had been irrevocably and profoundly changed. The digital dawn broke faster and more fiercely than the sun over the East River. Before the last police cruiser had pulled away from the curb, the story of the Vance Tower siege had become a viral supernova. News channels looped the grainy security footage, the sudden lockdown, the panicked faces of the elite, and the unmoving silhouette of Arthur Jenkins, a 72-year-old security guard, standing between them and an unseen killer. Headlines screamed from every screen. "The Old Guard, how one man's eyes saved New York's 1%. And invisible no more, the hero of Vance Tower." Art's weathered face, captured in a candid photo from years ago, was suddenly more famous than the celebrities he had spent a decade protecting. The narrative was irresistible, a modern-day fable of quiet virtue triumphing over arrogant power. Upstairs, in the sterile silence of her 87th floor office, Eleanor Vance watched the city come to life. The view had always been a symbol of her dominion, a glittering map of her success. But this morning, every pinprick of light represented a life, a story, as fragile and as significant as her own. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass showed a woman she barely recognized. The ironclad composure was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Shame was a cold, heavy stone in her gut. She had looked at Art and seen a disposable cog in her machine. She had glanced at Maria and Sofia and seen an unsightly inconvenience. She had been blind, not by accident, but by choice. The memory of the red laser dancing on the wall, a harbinger of death, was inextricably linked with the image of Sophia's small face burrowed into her mother's worn coat. One was a threat of annihilation, the other a testament to what was truly worth saving. Her first call was not to her board of directors or her legal team. It was to human resources. An hour later, Arthur Jenkins stood in her office, wearing the same crisp navy uniform, his posture as straight as ever. The cavernous space, designed to intimidate, seemed to have no effect on him. "Mr. Jenkins." "Art," Eleanor began, rising from her desk and walking around to meet him on equal ground. The gesture was uncharacteristic, and it hung in the air between them. "I asked you here to offer my profound apology, not just for my behavior last night, but for years of not seeing you." Art's gaze was steady. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I was doing my job, Miss Vance." "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You were doing more. You were protecting people who didn't even know they needed protection from a threat they couldn't see. While I was focused on threats to my bottom line, I was wrong." She paused, taking a breath. "Dave has been reassigned. The position of head of corporate security for Vance Industries is now open. It requires strategic oversight, threat assessment, and a team of over 300 personnel across 3 continents. It comes with a salary of $400,000 a year, full benefits, and a corporate car. I'm not offering it to you. I'm asking if you would please consider taking it." For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed Art's features. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face, searching for the artifice, the corporate spin. He found none. There was only a raw, desperate sincerity. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice raspy with emotion he rarely showed. "I'm a security guard." "You are a leader," Eleanor corrected him gently. "And this company needs your leadership. It needs your eyes. It needs your character." He stood a little taller, the weight of the offer settling on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of long overdue recognition. "I accept," he said. Eleanor's next meeting took place not in her office, but in a quiet lounge on the 30th floor where Maria Rodriguez was giving a final statement to a company representative. Sophia sat at a low table nearby, meticulously coloring a picture of a large, friendly-looking dog. When Eleanor entered, Maria instinctively tensed, her hand going to her daughter's shoulder. Eleanor ignored the representative, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Sophia. The little girl looked up, her brown eyes wide and curious. "That's a beautiful drawing," Eleanor said, her voice softer than anyone at Vance Industries had ever heard it. "You were so brave last night, Sophia. Braver than all the grown-ups." Sophia offered a shy smile and went back to her coloring. Eleanor then rose and turned to Maria, whose expression was a mixture of fear and confusion. "Maria," she began, "there is no way to undo the carelessness with which you and your daughter have been treated by this company, by me. An apology isn't enough. Action is the only thing that matters." She gestured to the folder in the dismissed representative's hand. "That life, the one of graveyard shifts and sleeping on coats, is over. Effective immediately." Maria's breath hitched. I don't understand." "I've created a new position," Eleanor explained, her words careful and deliberate. "Manager of Employee Welfare and Support Services. It's a salaried 9-to-5 position. You'd be responsible for ensuring that every low-wage employee in this building, the cleaning crews, the maintenance staff, the mailroom clerks, has access to the resources they need. Childcare, healthcare, navigation, financial literacy programs. You know their struggles better than any executive. You would be their advocate. Your starting salary would be $85,000. The Vance Tower Corporate Daycare has a spot for Sophia, starting tomorrow, free of charge." Maria stared, speechless. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. Silent messengers of a lifetime of struggle suddenly, miraculously, lifted. It wasn't just the money or the job. It was the dignity. It was being seen, heard, and valued not as a cleaner, but as a human being with wisdom born of hardship. "Why?" she whispered, the single word holding a universe of disbelief. "Because last night," Eleanor said, her gaze drifting towards Sophia, "your daughter reminded me of what a corporation is truly made of. It isn't glass and steel, it's people, and we have not been taking care of our people. I need you to help me fix that." 3 days later, the main lobby of the Vance Tower was transformed. The revolving doors, once a symbol of exclusion and panic, were propped open, welcoming a flood of reporters, photographers, and camera crews. A podium stood in the exact spot where Art had held the line. Eleanor Vance walked to the microphone, not with her usual intimidating stride, but with a measured, humble grace. To her right stood Arthur Jenkins, his old uniform replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He looked not changed, but revealed. To her left stood Maria Rodriguez, holding the hand of a beaming Sophia, who clutched her coloring of the friendly dog. Eleanor leaned into the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "For my entire career," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "I have measured value in dollars, in market share, in stock prices. I built this tower as a monument to that definition of value. Last night, 72 hours ago in this very lobby, I learned that I was profoundly wrong." She looked at Art. "I learned that true value is found in the quiet integrity of a man who sees his duty not just as a job, but as a sacred trust to protect others, even when they mock him for it. It is found in vigilance, in experience, and in a courage that does not require an audience." Then she looked at Maria and Sophia. "And I learned that true value is found in the fierce, unending resilience of a mother who will move heaven and earth to give her child a better life. It is found in the quiet dignity of working through the night, unseen and unthanked, to build a future." Her eyes swept across the cameras, speaking not just to the press, but to the world. "Today, I am announcing the formation of the Arthur Jenkins Valor Fund, an initial $10 million endowment dedicated to providing job retraining, housing assistance, and continuing education for elderly service workers. Furthermore, Vance Industries is instituting a new company-wide minimum wage of $25 an hour and providing free on-site childcare for all employees." A wave of astonished murmurs rippled through the lobby. "These are not acts of charity," Eleanor concluded, her voice thick with emotion. "They are acts of correction. They are an investment in the only asset that truly matters, our shared humanity. I was blind to it, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry. Mr. Jenkins, Maria, and Sophia. They didn't just save my life. They saved this company's soul." As applause erupted, thunderous and genuine, Eleanor stepped back. Art placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Maria squeezed Sophia's hand, her tears this time not of sorrow, but of overwhelming hope. In the heart of a city built on ambition and power, something had shifted. The invisible had become the celebrated, the powerful had learned humility, and the cold glass walls of the Vance Tower now reflected a warmth they had never known before. It was not a perfect ending, but it was a true beginning, a testament that sometimes it takes a single moment of seeing someone for who they truly are to change everything.